A woman walks into the office. She's carrying her phone and her eyes are wide open. And before she even says a word, the emotional temperature of the room changes. "Did you hear what happened?" she said. "Somebody's husband had a heart attack. There's a weather emergency. There's a recall. Traffic is terrible. Construction on the roads is terrible. There's executive gossip upstairs. A school shooting is trending on social media. Something bad happened somewhere." And within minutes, the entire office feels emotionally different. People stop working. People start reacting. People start speculating. People start doom scrolling. People start spreading the emotional charge to the next person. And here's the interesting part: the information itself is not what changed the room. The emotional contagion did. That's the pendulum. And once you understand this concept, you start seeing it everywhere. Welcome to the Kathie Owen Perspective podcast. My name is Kathie Owen, and if you're new here, my work sits at the intersection of leadership psychology, emotional regulation, workplace dynamics, and what I call human patterns under pressure. I help leaders and organizations identify the invisible emotional patterns that quietly shape culture, performance, trust, decision making, and nervous system regulation inside teams. And one of the frameworks I use constantly in my work comes from a book series called Reality Transurfing by Vadim Zeland. Reality Transurfing introduced me to the concept of pendulums. And once I understood this idea, I could never unsee it, because pendulums are everywhere. They are inside workplaces, inside families, inside relationships, inside politics, inside social media, inside group chats, inside leadership teams. And today, I want to teach you something incredibly important: how to stop getting emotionally hooked by these pendulums. Because most people don't realize they've already been captured until their nervous system is completely activated. So if you enjoy conversations about emotional regulation, leadership under pressure, nervous system awareness, and learning how to stay grounded in emotionally charged environments, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this episode, because it helps more people find this work. Also, there will be a full blog post with bonus resources linked in the description and show notes below. So let's talk about pendulums and how to deal with them. I talk about pendulums all the time on this channel, and I also talk about how are we going to deal with them, because they are everywhere. And pendulums are not always a bad thing. But what does end up happening that is bad is where your energy gets hooked and how it affects your entire life and nervous system. So, a pendulum is in Reality Transurfing, the book, and it's basically an energetic structure that feeds on emotional reaction, attention, identification, and collective energy. Now, before people get uncomfortable with the word energetic, let's make this practical. You already know what this feels like. A rumor spreads through the office. Somebody sends a panic-filled group message. Everybody starts reacting emotionally. Slack explodes. People speculate. Fear spreads. Urgency spreads. That's a pendulum. Social media outrage, a pendulum. Family drama, a pendulum. Political hysteria, a pendulum. Group panic, a pendulum. Workplace gossip, huge pendulum. And here's the important part: pendulums survive through emotional hooks. They need your reaction. They need your fear, your outrage, your urgency, your obsession, your attention. That's why Vadim Zeland says, and I love this quote, he says, "Dissatisfaction and lack of fulfillment are the pendulum's favorite dish." Yes, they are. When you're dissatisfied and when you feel a lack of fulfillment, you have been hooked by the pendulum. Emotionally dysregulated people are easier to hook. And honestly, Modern workplaces are filled with hooks. There's fear, there's comparison, micromanagement, urgency, scarcity, status, validation, performance anxiety, emotional contagion. Most organizations don't realize they're operating inside collective nervous system activation. Now, here's where this gets fascinating. I used to work with someone who was basically a walking pendulum in action, and I can bet that you can picture somebody in your head as I speak about this. And I don't mean that cruelly. She probably had no idea she was doing this. But if there was bad news, gossip, fear, urgency, executive tension, a recall, weather alerts, traffic, construction, drama, panic, or emotional stimulation, she became the delivery system. She would move from office to office, spreading emotionally charged information. And what fascinated me was this: people flocked to her because if you wanted to know what was happening, you asked her. But if you wanted peace, you avoided her. And one day I realized something important. She wasn't just spreading information, she was spreading emotional charge. And this is where people miss the lesson. The pendulum doesn't hook your mind first, it hooks your nervous system first. That tight chest, the urgency, the shakiness in your body, that emotional spike, the need to react immediately, the replaying conversations in your head, the doom scrolling, the compulsive checking for updates, the mental arguing, that obsession, that's the hook landing. And most people mistake that feeling for, oh my gosh, this must be really important. Not always. Sometimes it's simply activation. This is why emotional regulation matters so much, because the goal is not to destroy the pendulum. They are always going to be there. The goal is to stop feeding it. And that is very, very different. You don't beat a pendulum through force. In fact, it can get worse through force. You starve it through non participation. And I have to say, that changed my life because I started realizing something. I do not have to emotionally join every system around me. That's power. Now, let's talk about the big picture here: how to actually unhook yourself. And this is a question I'm often asked because this is the part most people skip. The first step is notice the hook. Most people are unconscious during this moment. They immediately merge with the emotional energy. But the second you notice, oh, my nervous system just got activated, you create separation. Observation weakens the pendulum. The moment you observe the hook instead of becoming hooked, something changes. You stop becoming part of the emotional system. You start watching the system. That's a completely different experience. And here's a good one that I mention often. One of the fastest ways to weaken a pendulum is through humor. Because humor collapses importance. The pendulum wants a courtroom. Humor actually turns it into a sitcom. I love that analogy. And that doesn't mean you become dismissive or cruel. It means you stop feeding emotional hypnosis. You stop treating every emotional spike like an emergency. This is also why emotionally healthy teams laugh more. Not because they avoid pressure, but because they reduce excess importance. And this brings us to another concept in reality transurfing: importance and excess potential. The more emotionally charged and important something becomes in your mind, the more distorted your perception becomes. You stop observing clearly. You start reacting automatically. That is excess potential. And pendulums love excess potential. They thrive on emotional intensity. This is why some people unconsciously spread fear to everybody around them. Not necessarily because they're bad people, but because fear seeks reinforcement. The nervous system says, if everybody feels unsafe too, maybe I'll feel safer. But all that does is spread the emotional field. Now, here's something incredibly important. You can care deeply without becoming emotionally hijacked. A lot of people think, if I don't emotionally react, I'm cold. No. Compassion does not require emotional contagion. In fact, I would say the opposite. You can be informed without drowning. You can care without spiraling. You can stay grounded without becoming detached from humanity. And that distinction is massive, especially for helpers, teachers, leaders, parents, and highly sensitive people. Because when you react without drawing into the emotional contagion, you conserve your energy, and that's where your power lies. Now, let's get practical. What do you do in the moment the pendulum hooks you? Let's say somebody walks into the office and says, "Oh my God, did you hear what just happened?" And suddenly your nervous system spikes. Here's what most people do. They match the emotional energy. They escalate, they react, they panic, they spread it further. They replay it, they obsess over it. That feeds the pendulum. Instead, pause. Notice the activation. Slow your breathing. Observe the room. Observe the emotional system. And silently ask yourself, what role is everyone playing right now? Now suddenly you can see the rescuer, the victim, the controller, the performer, the avoider, the martyr, the emotional distributor. I have to laugh. And once you see the system, you start drowning inside of it. This is also where nervous system regulation becomes incredibly important. Sometimes the fastest way to stop feeding a pendulum is physical. Go outside, take a walk, drink water, move your body, stop rereading the emails, stop checking the comments, stop looking at your phone, stop consuming more fear-based input, stop replaying the situation, interrupt the loop. Because pendulums survive through repeated attention. Attention is energy. And if I'm being completely honest, and I bet you recognize this too, one of the most powerful things you can do is remain grounded while everybody else escalates. Because pendulums collapse when nobody reacts. Nobody feeds the drama. People stop personalizing behavior. Someone remains grounded, and observation replaces emotional contagion. That is emotional regulation under pressure. And this is something I now use constantly in my work, whether I'm observing leadership teams, workplace culture, executive presence, or organizational dynamics. I'm always watching who spreads emotional charge, who stabilizes rooms, who escalates systems, who personalizes everything, who remains grounded under pressure. Because one emotionally regulated person can change an entire room. And that is leadership. Real executive presence says, I do not need to emotionally join this chaos to survive. That's strength. And I think this may be one of the most important skills people can develop right now. Because modern life is designed to hook your nervous system constantly. But not every emotional spike deserves your attention. Not every workplace fire deserves your nervous system. So if you take anything from this episode, let it be this. You do not have to emotionally join every system around you. You can observe without absorbing. And that is where real power begins. All right. Thank you so much for being here today. If this episode resonated with you, share it with somebody who constantly gets emotionally hooked by workplace drama, family systems, social media fear, or collective panic. And don't forget to like and subscribe because it helps this message reach more people. I'll also link the full companion blog post with bonus resources, examples, and deeper insights below in the show notes and description. And if you want to work with me directly, this is the kind of work I do every day. I help leaders, I help teams and organizations identify hidden human patterns that quietly destabilize trust, performance, emotional regulation, and culture under pressure. Because whether people realize it or not, human behavior drives everything. All right. That's my episode for today. I trust you found it helpful, and thank you for being here. And I will see you in the next episode of the Kathie Owen Perspective podcast.